For 40 years, my family has celebrated a saint. But what if the man your town built statues for was the monster who haunted your childhood nightmares? My story isn't just about a secret. It's about the price of silence and the terrifying power of a truth that refuses to die. Today, on the 40th anniversary of my father's celebrated death, I'm going to tear down this house of lies, brick by painful brick, even if it destroys me in the process. This is a journey into the dark heart of a perfect family. If you believe some stories need to be told, no matter the cost, then follow my channel, like this video, and hit that notification bell, because the silence ends now. The house smells of lemon polish and regret. It's a scent I've known my whole life, a chemical lie layered over a foundation of decay. The sharp, sterile citrus is my brother Mark's doing, or rather his wife's. Every year, before this day, they send a cleaning crew to scrub the life out of this old place, to polish the mahogany and beat the dust from the drapes, as if a clean surface can somehow purify the rot within. They think it erases the years, the stains you can't see. But I can smell the other thing, the regret. It's a damp, earthy scent, like old paper and dried tears, seeping up from the floorboards. It's the true smell of home. Today is the 40th anniversary of my father's death. Mark, in his infinite capacity for self-deception, insists we call it Remembrance Day. It sounds so noble, doesn't it? Like a day for fallen soldiers, for heroes. And in Willow Creek, David Anderson was a hero. The library has his name on it. There's a bronze plaque in the town square. To them, he was a patriarch, a pillar, the man who built half the businesses on Main Street with a firm handshake and an honest man's smile. For me, this day is something else entirely. It's the anniversary of my silence. A silence so profound, so long-standing, it has its own weight, its own texture. It sits in the chairs beside me. It sleeps in the empty rooms upstairs. It breathes in the drafts that whisper through the halls. They all think the quiet is a sign of peace. My father's death was supposed to be a liberation. The tyrant was gone. The storm had passed. Anna could finally be at rest. They look at me, a woman in her 70s, living alone in this cavernous house, and they see fragility. They see a quiet life, a spinster's gentle decline. They are so wrong. The real prison wasn't the man. He was just the architect. The real prison is the memory, and the bars are made of the love and loyalty of those who chose not to see. It's a memory that has been sealed shut, as surely and as finally as the door to the basement room. That door. It's at the end of the hall, past the kitchen. It's made of solid oak, dark and imposing. 60 years ago, my father nailed it shut himself. He didn't just lock it. He drove 6-inch nails through the frame into the wall, then plastered over the seam. He painted it the same bland cream as the rest of the hallway, as if hoping it would simply disappear. But it never did. It's a blank space that screams. No one in this family has dared to open it, to even speak of it. It's our greatest monument to denial. For Mark, it's a quirk of an old house, a forgotten storage space. For me, it's a tomb. It's where my childhood went to die. I run a trembling hand over the lace doily on the armchair. His armchair. The fabric is stiff with starch, intricate and white. A perfect, pretty lie covering the worn leather where the shape of his body is still imprinted. I can almost feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of his cigars and bay rum cologne that no amount of lemon polish can ever truly erase. I'm waiting. The family will arrive soon. They will come bearing casseroles sealed in aluminum foil and condolences wrapped in platitudes. Their faces will be masks of practiced sympathy, their eyes carefully avoiding mine for too long. They are all so completely, willfully, blissfully oblivious to the rot that holds up the very foundations of this house. Or perhaps they're not. Perhaps they just have a higher tolerance for the stench. The grandfather clock in the hall begins to chime. 4 o'clock. The first of the pilgrims will be arriving soon. Mark, of course. He is always first. Punctuality is a virtue he inherited from our father, a tool of control disguised as courtesy. I smooth my dress, a simple gray linen that feels like a shroud. I am the official mourner, the keeper of the flame for a man whose memory I would rather douse in gasoline. My role is to be quiet, to be sad, to be a testament to his benevolent care. My existence as a dependent, unmarried woman is, in Mark's eyes, the final proof of our father's paternal devotion. He took care of his delicate daughter her whole life. What a saint. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway signals his arrival. A heavy car door slams shut with an air of importance. A moment later, the front door opens without a knock. He never knocks. This is still his father's house, and by extension, his domain. Anna? His voice echoes in the high-ceilinged foyer. It's a voice accustomed to being obeyed, a voice that has never known a moment of self-doubt. He appears in the living room doorway, tall and broad-shouldered in his tailored suit, his hair perfectly silvered at the temples. He looks every bit the part of the town's leading citizen, the worthy successor to a local dynasty. He comes toward me and performs the ritual. He leans down and kisses my cheek. His lips are thin and dry, like old paper. The contact is brief, meaningless, a gesture devoid of warmth. His eyes, the same piercing blue as our father's, don't meet mine. They scan the room, checking for imperfections, for any deviation from the script. Anna, he says, his voice a low murmur that is more of a command than a greeting. Try not to make a scene this year. There it is, the annual warning, the preemptive strike against my grief, or what he perceives as my performance of it. We all know how you get. He straightens a picture on the wall, a landscape of a serene lake that has always felt like a mockery. His words hang in the air between us, thick and suffocating. He's referring to the incident, 10 years ago, the 30th anniversary. I'd had 2 glasses of sherry, one more than my prescribed limit. The alcohol had loosened the seal on my silence just a fraction. I started talking, not about the truth, not the real, unspeakable thing, just about secrets. About how houses have memories, how walls can talk if you listen closely enough. My voice had gotten a little too loud, a little too sharp. I saw the polite smiles on the faces of his business partners begin to falter. Mark had moved with terrifying speed. He'd crossed the room, his own smile never wavering, and grabbed my arm. His fingers, strong from a lifetime of being in charge, dug into my flesh. The pain was a sharp, familiar shock. He'd leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch, and hissed into my ear. The words a venomous whisper meant only for me. You're just trying to get attention. Dad's gone. Let him rest in peace. Then he'd steered me out of the room, explaining to his guests, with a sad, knowing shake of his head, that his poor sister was overtired. His words, then and now, are not just dismissive. They are an accusation. In his mind, my pain is a fabrication, a selfish, theatrical ploy to tarnish a saint's memory. I am the jealous sibling, the failure who couldn't measure up, inventing a sickness to spoil his inheritance. He, the golden son, he was always the golden one. He got the praise, the encouragement, the future. He inherited the family business, the portfolio, the sterling reputation. I inherited the silence and this house, a gilded cage where he could keep me safely contained. He has always been our father's staunchest defender, and by necessity, my most dedicated jailer. I have no intention of making a scene, Mark, I say, my voice level. I have learned over 60 years how to control its tremor, how to bleach it of emotion. I am merely waiting for our family to arrive, to remember your father. The emphasis on your is subtle, but he catches it. A muscle twitches in his jaw. Our father, Anna. He was our father. Of course, I reply, turning my gaze away from him, toward the mantelpiece. It's safer there. I can't look at him for too long. I see the ghost of David in the set of his shoulders, in the arrogant tilt of his head. Just be pleasant, he says, his tone softening into one of strained patience, the kind a parent uses with a difficult child. For me, for the family. Leo is coming with his parents today. I don't want him to see his great-aunt acting strangely. He thinks my truth is a performance. He sees my trauma as a behavioral problem, an eccentricity to be managed. The deep, abiding irony is that the only performance I've ever given is this one, the role of the quiet, harmless sister, the one he's watching me play right now. For 60 years, I've been the greatest actress of my generation, and my only audience has been my own family. And they've never once suspected they weren't watching a tragedy, but a horror story. My gaze lingers on the mantelpiece, a carefully curated shrine to a family that never truly existed. It's the centerpiece of the room, polished to a high sheen, populated by silver-framed lies. There he is, David, my father, captured in his prime, leaning against the hood of his first brand-new Cadillac, smiling his public smile. It's a smile that could sell swampland in Florida, a smile that radiated confidence and community spirit. It was a weapon, that smile. It disarmed everyone but me. I knew what came after the smile, in the quiet of the house, when the world was asleep. Next to him is my mother, Helen. A formal studio portrait from their wedding day. She's beautiful, her hair styled in soft waves, her eyes vacant. That's the only word for them. Even then, on what should have been the happiest day of her life, there was a hollowness there, a premonition of the ghost she would become. She looks like a woman posing with her captor, not her husband. And then there's the big frame in the center. Mark and me. I'm about 5, he's about 10. We're standing in the garden, squinting into the sun. He has a protective arm slung around my shoulder, a proprietary gesture even then. He's smiling broadly, already handsome, already confident. I am a small, pale thing in a starched white dress, and I am not smiling. My mouth is a thin, straight line. My eyes are wide, staring at something just beyond the camera, something no one else could see. We are frozen in a sepia-toned lie, the image of a perfect brother and his adoring little sister. A lie that has defined our entire lives. My fingers, almost of their own accord, drift up to the chain around my neck. They find the familiar weight of the silver locket. It's heavy and always cold against my skin, a small, constant reminder, a gift from my mother. It was my 16th birthday. That's a day I remember with a clarity that feels like a physical scar. The memory isn't hazy or dreamlike. It's sharp, etched in acid. It had been a Thursday. The air was thick with the coming of a summer storm. The house was quiet. Dad was at a Rotary Club dinner, and Mark was out with his friends. It was just my mother and me, a rare occurrence. She was in the parlor, mending one of Mark's shirts, her needle moving with a quick, nervous rhythm. I had been gathering my courage for weeks, a sick, churning knot in my stomach that made it hard to breathe. The nightmares had become unbearable. They weren't nightmares, of course. They were memories that my mind could only process in the dark. But I didn't have the words for that then. All I had was the terror. I remember standing in the doorway, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. She didn't look up. "What is it, Anna? You're hovering." My voice, when it finally came, was a whisper, a tiny, fragile thing. "Mother, I've been having nightmares." She sighed, a small puff of irritation. "We've talked about this. You have an overactive imagination." "No," I managed, taking a step into the room. The floorboards creaked. They're about Dad." Her hands stopped moving. The needle was poised mid-stitch. For one wild, hopeful second, I thought she would look at me. I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear. Recognition. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She deliberately set the shirt aside, her movement slow and measured. She stood up and walked over to her jewelry box on the side table. She didn't look at me, not once. Her back was a rigid wall between us. She opened the box. I could hear the faint tinkling music it played. She fumbled inside for a moment before pulling out the locket on its delicate silver chain. She turned, and her face was a mask of placid denial. She held it out to me. "Happy birthday, dear," she said, her voice bright, false. I just stared at it, dangling from her fingers. It was beautiful, heart-shaped, with intricate engravings of vines and flowers. "I tried to tell you," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. She moved toward me then, her expression hardening. She took my chin in her hand, her touch surprisingly firm. "A pretty girl shouldn't say such ugly things, Anna." The words were soft, but they landed like stones. "Do you understand me? You don't want to cause trouble for your father. He works so hard for us, for this family." She unclasped the chain and fastened it around my neck. The metal was shockingly cold against my hot skin. It felt like a manacle. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work, her smile returning. "So lovely. Now let's not have any more talk of nightmares." "It's unbecoming." The locket wasn't a gift. It was a payment. It was a bribe for my silence. A beautiful, ornate piece of silver purchased to seal my lips. I learned a powerful lesson that day. I learned that my truth was ugly. I learned that my father's comfort was more important than my safety. And I learned that my mother's love was conditional, something to be earned through complicity and silence. The locket is a perfect symbol of that love, beautiful on the outside, intricately crafted to hide the fact that it's completely, utterly hollow inside. I've never once opened it. I don't need to. I know there's nothing there. I drop my hand from the cold metal, the memory receding, leaving its familiar ache behind. Mark is watching me, his brow furrowed with suspicion. He saw my hand go to the locket. He knows its story, or the official version of it, at least. The sweet, sentimental gift from a loving mother to her sensitive daughter. Another brick in the wall of their perfect family narrative. "Are you all right?" he asks, and the feigned concern in his voice is like sandpaper on my soul. "You look pale." "I'm fine, Mark." "Just thinking." "Don't think too much," he says, with a small dismissive wave of his hand. "It's not good for you." And there it is again. The casual infantilization. Don't think, Anna. Don't feel, Anna. Just sit there and be the quiet, broken doll we can all pity and control. It has been the theme of my life. For years after that birthday, after my attempt to speak was so brutally and effectively silenced, they built the cage around me. It wasn't a cage of iron bars, but one of care and concern, which is far more insidious. They said I was delicate, that my nerves were bad. The town doctor, a close friend of my father's, prescribed sedatives and rest. My overactive imagination became a clinical diagnosis. It was a brilliant strategy. How can anyone believe the accusations of a girl who is officially unwell? The monster wasn't just a monster. He was a master, an architect of pain. He didn't use brute force and overt threats. That would have been too simple, too easy to expose. David's genius was in manipulation. The abuse was never framed as violence. It was a secret, a special game just for us. He would bring me gifts afterwards. A doll, a book, a pretty ribbon for my hair. He would praise me for being his special girl, for being so grown up. He twisted the horror into a shared confidence, a burden of intimacy that he placed squarely on my small shoulders. The guilt became mine, not his. I was the one keeping the secret, so I must be the one who was dirty, who was wrong. And after my mother shut me down, the control tightened. He began to monitor everything. My mail was opened by mistake. My phone calls were listened in on from the extension in his study. He would ask who I was talking to, what we talked about. It was all done under the guise of fatherly protection. He was just making sure his fragile daughter wasn't being taken advantage of. Mark, of course, saw none of this as control. He saw a devoted father caring for a difficult, moody sister who was prone to fantasy and depression. He saw my isolation, my dependence, my failure to marry or build a life of my own, not as the result of a calculated campaign of psychological imprisonment, but as proof of my inherent weakness. My brokenness was the evidence that validated their story. I had to be broken, because if I wasn't, then the only other explanation was that our father, the sainted David Anderson, was a monster. And that was a truth Mark's entire world was built to deny. The car doors of arriving guests saved me from having to respond. Mark's face smooths over, the mask of the gracious host slipping perfectly into place. The performance is about to begin. The sound of Mark's car engine fades down the long driveway, a receding hum that leaves behind a silence more profound than its absence. For a few moments, I just stand in the hallway, letting the quiet settle. It's a hollow quiet, the kind that echoes with things unsaid. The house feels emptier with him gone, but not safer. It just feels more like a tomb. My tomb. I walk, my steps measured on the old hardwood floors. Not to the living room or the kitchen, but to the small room at the back of the house that I have always called my study. It's more of a library of my own private grief. The air inside is still and smells of old paper and dust, a scent I find perversely comforting. My fingers tremble slightly as I insert a small tarnished silver key into the lock of a squat gray metal filing cabinet. It's the only thing in this house that is truly mine, the only thing my father never thought to inspect, the only thing Mark doesn't know exists. The drawer slides open with a metallic groan of protest, revealing its contents. Dozens and dozens of cassette tapes, each labeled with a date in my own meticulous, spidery handwriting, my secret history. For 20 years, from the age of 25 to 45, I drove myself into the city once a week to see a therapist, a kind, sharp woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, and after every single session, I would sit in my car, my hands shaking, and record my own summary, my own raw, uncensored reflections of what we had discussed. The tapes were my insurance against my own mind, my proof that the gaslighting I'd endured my whole life hadn't completely erased me. My fingers brush over the labels. 1978. 1985, 1992. I pull one out from near the beginning. The plastic casing is cool in my palm. October 17, 1974. I carry it over to the small, portable cassette player on my desk, the one I keep hidden in a drawer beneath old linens. The machine is an antique, but it works. I press the tape in, the door clicking shut with a sound of finality. I take a deep breath and press the play button. First, there is a long hiss of blank tape, the sound of empty time. Then, a click, a rustle of fabric, and a voice. My voice. But it's not the voice I hear in my head now, the one worn smooth by age and silence. This voice is thin, reedy, and trembling on the edge of a sob. Dr. Reed asked me to talk about the morning sickness again, my younger self says, her voice tight, as if forcing the words past a blockage in her throat. She said describing it, giving it a name, can take away some of its power. Power. That's a funny word for it. It felt like my body was betraying me, like something alien was growing inside, a secret I couldn't control, couldn't hide. I'd wake up and the world would be spinning, the smell of bacon cooking downstairs. Father always insisted on bacon. It would send me running. I'd kneel on the cold tile of the bathroom floor, my forehead pressed against the porcelain, and I would just heave. I wasn't throwing up food. I was throwing up the truth. I close my eyes, listening. The memory is so potent, it's almost a physical sensation. I can feel the cold tile on my skin, smell the ghost of frying pork. Mark just thought I was being dramatic. Anna's always so sensitive, he'd say to Mother at breakfast, rolling his eyes. And she would just give me this look, not of concern, of appraisal, like she was measuring the danger. One morning, she followed me. I was rinsing my mouth at the sink, and I saw her reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. She didn't say anything. She just put a cool hand on my forehead, like she was checking for a fever, and her eyes were like a banker's eyes, calculating. She said, "You need to be more careful, Anna. A girl's reputation is a fragile thing." She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the disruption to the perfect family portrait. The tape hisses for a moment. I can hear a shaky breath being drawn. And then came the day. The voice on the tape continues, dropping to a near whisper. The day he drove me. Father. He told me to pack a small bag. Just a few things. For a little rest, he said. His voice was so calm, so reasonable, like he was telling me we were going for a picnic. He didn't let Mother or Mark see me leave. He drove and drove for hours. He didn't speak to me, just kept his eyes on the road, his jaw set. We went through 6 towns I'd never seen before. Each one looked grayer than the last. Finally, he pulled up to this building. It was red brick, with tall, narrow windows that looked like slits. There was a wrought iron fence around it, with points on top. It didn't look like a place for rest. It looked like a prison. I gripped the arms of my chair. My knuckles are white. I remember the sour taste of fear in my mouth, the way the cheap upholstery of his car seat felt scratchy against my arms. He walked me to the door. My younger self whispers into the microphone of the past. A woman with a face like a clenched fist opened it. She didn't smile. Father smiled for the both of them, that wide, charming smile he saved for the public. "Here she is," he said to the woman, his hand on my shoulder. His grip was like iron. "My daughter, Anna. She's a little troubled." He called the place a home for troubled girls. I was the trouble. My body was the trouble. The life growing inside me was the trouble. They took my bag. They took my name, really. I was just the new girl. And the baby, they told me later, was a boy. He was taken away the moment he was born. I heard him cry once, just once, a thin, fragile sound. Then nothing. I never saw him. I never held him. A dry sob escapes my throat now, in the quiet of my study. A sound I didn't know I still had in me. When I asked Father months later what he told everyone, he just patted my hand. "Don't you worry your pretty little head," he said. "As far as anyone is concerned, you had a bit of a nervous condition, a breakdown. You spent a few months at a very exclusive sanatorium in the countryside, recovering." He said the word sanatorium as if it were a luxury hotel. Mark believed him, of course. Why wouldn't he? It was easier than the truth. It explained my sadness, my quietness. I wasn't a victim. I was just fragile Anna, the nervous one, the one who couldn't cope. The voice on the tape breaks completely, dissolving into quiet, muffled weeping. I don't need to hear anymore. I press the stop button, the silence rushing back in, thick and heavy. These tapes, they are the only proof I have that I am not insane. They are not just memories. They are the raw, unedited validation of my own life, a life that everyone else, my own family, conspired to erase. Listening to my own past self recount the horror of that home ignites a different kind of memory. The clinical, institutionalized trauma is one thing, but the trauma that preceded it, the one that happened within these very walls, was another beast entirely. The tapes bring him back in horrifying, technicolor clarity. David, my father. The world remembers David as a pillar of the community, the charming, handsome owner of the town's biggest hardware store, the man who sponsored the Little League team every year, whose photograph was always in the local paper, shaking hands, cutting ribbons. He wasn't a slobbering, obvious monster. If he had been, perhaps it would have been easier. No, he was far, far worse. He was an artist of cruelty, a master architect of psychological pain. I close my eyes, and I'm 16 again. The scent of lavender from the soap he insisted Mother use fills the memory. He'd come into my room after one of the quiet, terrible nights. The house would be silent, Mother and Mark asleep in their own worlds, oblivious or choosing to be. I'd be lying in my bed, rigid, feeling like a crime scene. And he would come in, not with a scowl, but with a smile and a gift. One time it was a book of poetry. Emily Dickinson. He'd sit on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping under his weight, a pressure that made my stomach clench. He'd open the book, his large, clean hands turning the fragile pages. "Listen to this, Anna," he'd say, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door." He'd look up at me, his eyes searching mine. "You see, you're like that. You have a special soul. You're not like the other girls. They're all so loud, so simple. But you understand things." Another time, it was a blue ribbon for my hair, a bolt of pure, deep sapphire silk. He held it up to my cheek. "This matches your eyes," he said softly. "A beautiful girl like you deserves beautiful things. But this is our secret, understand. This gift, this time we have together. It's a testament to how much I love you, how special you are to me. No one else would understand the bond we have. He never raised his voice. He never had to. He groomed me, not just for the physical violation, but for the silence that was its necessary companion. He didn't make it an assault. He framed it as an initiation into a secret society of two. He was the gatekeeper, and I was the chosen one. He made the violation feel like a conspiracy, a shared, sacred secret, and in doing so, he took the guilt, which should have been his alone, and he placed it squarely on my small shoulders. It became my own private, crushing burden. I was not just a victim. I was a co-conspirator. The shame wasn't just that it happened. The shame was that a part of my terrified, manipulated 16-year-old mind believed it was a sign of love. He would praise me for my silence, for my maturity. "You're so mature for your age, Anna. You understand things other girls don't." Each word was another brick in the wall of my prison, a wall I helped build. I was protecting him. I was protecting our special bond. The truth was too horrifying to contemplate, that I wasn't special, I was just available, and that the man I called father was a predator hiding in plain sight. And when I returned from the sanatorium, hollowed out and haunted, the final fortifications of my prison were erected. The cage was complete, and it wasn't made of iron bars, but of care and concern. It was a golden cage, and all the more inescapable for it. My father took control of everything. It started subtly. "Oh, let me get your mail, Anna. You look so tired." He'd bring in the letters, and I just knew, he had read them first. Any letters from old school friends, the ones who had moved away, soon trickled to a stop. I'm sure he never passed them on. The telephone became another tool of his surveillance. If I was on a call, I would hear the faint, telltale click of the extension in his study being lifted. The conversation would die in my throat. My friends, the few I had left in town, eventually stopped calling, tired of the awkward silences and my monosyllabic replies. He didn't forbid me from having a life. He just made it impossible. Financially, I was entirely his creature. He paid for this house, this quiet prison on the edge of town, far enough away from prying eyes. He paid for my groceries, my clothes, the few books I was allowed to order. It wasn't generosity. It was a leash. Every dollar was a link in a chain that bound me to him, ensuring I could never leave, never build a life of my own, never create a space where the secret might accidentally slip out. I was his living, breathing liability, and he managed me with the same cool efficiency with which he managed his business inventory. Mark, meanwhile, flourished under this regime. He was sent away to a good college, his tuition paid without a second thought. He came home in the summers, full of stories of parties and football games, his world expanding while mine contracted to the four walls of this house. He was groomed to take over the family business, to inherit the legacy, the name, the respect. He saw my quiet, isolated existence not as the result of a calculated campaign of control, but as a personal failure. My dependency on our father was, in his eyes, proof of my inherent weakness. My inability to get over my nervous condition was a source of constant irritation and embarrassment for him. He saw a wilting spinster, a burden, while he saw himself as the strong, successful son who had earned his inheritance. He never once considered that my dependency and his inheritance were two sides of the same counterfeit coin, both minted by our father to serve his own monstrous needs. My prison was the price of his freedom, and he paid it gladly, without ever knowing the cost. The delivery truck for the Remembrance Day dinner arrives, its beeping reverse alarm a shrill intrusion into the house's heavy silence. It's Mark's grandson, my grandnephew Leo, who helps the driver unload the catered trays. Mark always sends him. He thinks it's a good lesson in family duty. For me, it's usually just another painful reminder of the generations that have passed while I have remained frozen in time. But Leo is different. He's a gentle soul, a boy of 19 with his mother's kind eyes that actually see things, not just look at them. He doesn't have Mark's blustering certainty or his father's casual disdain. He carries the heavy trays of food into the kitchen, setting them on the counter with care. "That should be everything, Grandma Anna," he says, his voice soft. He wipes a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Dad said to make sure the roast was kept warm." "Thank you, Leo. You're a good boy," I say, the words feeling rusty in my mouth. He smiles, a genuine, unaffected smile. As he turns to leave, we pass the door at the end of the hall, the basement door. It's different from the others. It's thicker, solid oak, and around its frame, you can still see the faint outline where my father had it sealed shut with wood and nails 60 years ago. It's painted over now, but the seal is still there, a scar on the house itself. Leo hesitates, his steps slowing. He stops and looks at it, his head tilted. He's seen it 100 times, but today, for some reason, he truly notices it. "Grandma Anna," he begins, his voice lowered, as if sharing a secret. "My dad. He always says this door is sealed because of a bad mold problem a long time ago. He said Great-Grandpa David fixed it so no one would get sick." I stay silent, my heart giving a strange, painful lurch. The official story, the one manufactured for public consumption. Leo worries his lower lip, his gaze still fixed on the door. "But I heard a story once, from one of the old guys who works at the hardware store. He said he was just a kid back then, but he remembers. He remembers there was a rumor that something bad happened down there, something no one ever talked about." He turns from the door and looks directly at me, and in his eyes, I don't see the morbid curiosity of a teenager looking for a ghost story. I see a genuine, searching question. I see empathy. For the first time in 60 years, someone is questioning the narrative. Someone is looking at the sealed door and sensing that the thing being kept in isn't mold, but a memory. My entire life, my entire survival, has been built on deflection and silence. The instinct is to shut him down, to repeat the lie. But looking at his earnest, open face, the words catch in my throat. All I can manage is a quiet, non-committal reply. "Some things, Leo," I say, my voice steady despite the tremor running through me, "are better left sealed." It's an evasion, but it's not a lie. And the way he looks at me then, it changes everything. He doesn't press. He doesn't mock. He just nods slowly. A look of profound, almost adult sympathy settling on his young features. He sees the pain behind my words. He sees me. He just says, "Okay, Grandma Anna, I'll see you at dinner tonight." He leaves, and I'm left standing in the hallway, my hand resting on the wall for support. That look in his eyes, that flicker of understanding, of belief, it's like a drop of rain falling on the sun-baked, barren soil of my heart. And in that desolate place, a single, dangerous seed of hope begins to germinate. The hope that I might not have to be the sole keeper of the truth forever. That evening, the house is suffocating. Mark and his family arrive, filling the space with their loud, confident chatter. The dining room is set with the good silver and china, the table groaning under the weight of the catered feast. It's all a performance. A yearly pageant staged by Mark to honor the memory of a man who never existed. The Remembrance Day dinner. At the head of the table, where my father used to sit, hangs the portrait. It's a grand, oil-painted thing, commissioned the year before he died. In it, he is the man the town knew, handsome, smiling, his eyes twinkling with a manufactured warmth that turns my stomach. It is a masterpiece of public relations. Mark stands, tapping his wine glass with a fork for attention. The chatter subsides. He beams around the table, at his wife, his son, his grandchildren. Leo sitting quietly amongst them. "Friends, family," Mark begins, his voice booming with false sincerity. 40 years. 40 years since we lost the patriarch of this family, the man who built everything we have, my father, David. He was more than a businessman. He was a visionary. He was more than a father. He was a rock, a foundation of integrity, strength, and community spirit. I only hope that I have lived up to half the man he was. So, let us raise our glasses to the memory of a truly great man. "To David!" the family choruses. They all drink. I do not. I just watch them, a cold, clear rage solidifying in my chest. The seed of hope Leo planted hours earlier has taken root, and it is growing into something sharp and thorny. As Mark sits down, basking in the glow of his own piety, I make my move. I push my chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. all eyes turn to me. I pick up my own full glass of deep, blood-red wine. My hand trembles, but not from weakness. It trembles with a 60-year-old rage that is finally demanding an outlet. I make the tremble look like the frailty of old age, a convincing performance. I take a step towards the fireplace, as if to get a better look at the portrait everyone has just toasted. He was certainly one of a kind, I say, my voice surprisingly clear. I am only a few feet from the painting. I stumble. It's a deliberate, calculated movement, a clumsy lurch that looks entirely accidental. The wine glass tilts in my hand. The dark red liquid arcs through the air in a perfect, glistening stream, splashing directly across the grand portrait. A collective, horrified gasp fills the room. The wine lands on his face. It runs down his smiling, oil-painted cheeks in thick, dark rivulets. It drips from his chin onto the crisp white collar of his shirt. It looks exactly like blood. It looks like the truth. Silence. Stunned. Absolute silence. Then, Mark's voice, erupting like a volcano. "Mother of God, Anna, what is wrong with you?" he shouts, jumping to his feet, his face purple with fury. His wife is already dabbing at the painting with a napkin, making the red smear worse. I don't answer him. I don't look at him. I just stand there, looking at the ruined portrait, at the blood on my father's face. And for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, a small, vicious, and deeply satisfying smile plays on my lips. The silence has been broken. The first crack has just appeared in the flawless facade of this family, and I was the one who put it there. The tremor in my hand as I retrieved the mail from the box was a familiar companion, a 60-year-old echo of a terror so ingrained it had become part of my biology. But the stiffness of the envelope I pulled from the pile was different. It was heavy, cream-colored, with an embossed return address I didn't recognize at first glance. A law firm. Mark's law firm. I knew, even before I slit the seal with a kitchen knife, that this was not a social call. This was an escalation. The house was quiet, a hollow vessel holding 60 years of unspoken screams. The scent of lemon polish and old wood, once a comfort, now felt like the cloying sweetness of funeral flowers. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my mother had once served me, toast and silence, and unfolded the thick, crackling paper. The language was cold, brutally formal. A petition. The words leaped off the page, sharp and sterile as surgical instruments. Legal guardianship over the person and affairs of Anna Vance. They used my maiden name, a deliberate erasure of the life I'd never been allowed to have. My eyes scanned the paragraphs, each one a nail being hammered into my coffin, citing my increasingly erratic behavior. What behavior? Spilling wine on a portrait of a monster, refusing to participate in the family's collective delusion. Destructive tendencies. The only thing I had ever wanted to destroy was the lie that had consumed my life. And finally, the ultimate condescending blow. Advanced age and diminished capacity. He was declaring me unfit, incompetent, a child to be managed. The document went on to outline his proposed solution with a chilling efficiency. He intended to petition the court to grant him power of attorney to sell this house, my house, the very cage he and my father had built for me, and to place me in a facility. Silver Meadows Assisted Living, the brochure tucked inside the envelope chirped, its glossy photos showing smiling, vacant-eyed seniors playing checkers. It looked less like a home and more like a place where inconvenient people were stored until they expired. He wasn't just trying to silence me anymore. That had been his lifelong project. This was a new, more final solution. He was going to erase me. He would scrub my existence from the deed of this house, move my body to a numbered room, and seize control of the narrative completely. Anna, the tragic, confused old woman who had finally, mercifully, been taken care of. The family secret, neutralized and institutionalized. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, heavy with the weight of every lie, every moment of complicity, every averted gaze. I felt the familiar chill of fear coiling in my stomach, the old instinctual response to a threat from my own blood. It was the same fear that had kept me silent when I was 16, the same fear that had paralyzed me for decades. But then something else began to stir. It started as a low hum beneath the panic, a deep, resonant frequency I hadn't felt in years. It was the slow, burning heat of rage. Not the hot, explosive anger of a tantrum, but a cold, clarifying fire. It burned away the fog of helplessness. It cauterized the wound of my lifelong terror. The letter in my hand was not a legal document. It was a declaration of war. Mark had mistaken my silence for submission. He had mistaken my trauma for weakness. He had just made the last and greatest mistake of his life. I stood up, the chair scraping against the linoleum. The letter, once so heavy, now felt like a feather in my hand. He thought this house was my prison. He was about to find out it was my armory. I walked to the phone, my steps steady, my purpose absolute. The tremor in my hand was gone. The phone rang 4 times before a calm, familiar voice answered. Dr. Reed. Evelyn, I said, my own voice sounding strange to me, stripped of its usual waver. It was solid. It was stone. It's Anna. He's done it. He's trying to have me put away. There was a pause, then the soft sound of a chair creaking as she shifted. Anna, I'm so sorry. Tell me exactly what happened. And so I did. I read the letter to her, my voice never faltering as I recited the litany of accusations. The erratic behavior, the destructive tendencies, the plan to sell my home and lock me away in a place with a cheerful, deceptive name. When I finished, the silence on the line was profound. It wasn't the empty, damning silence of my mother. It was a weighted silence, full of thought and empathy. This is an aggressive move, Anna, she said finally. It's designed to intimidate you into compliance. He's counting on you being too frightened to fight back. He's right, I said. And for a second, a flicker of the old fear returned. I have been frightened my whole life. Frightened of him, of my father's ghost, of this house. But not anymore. Evelyn, fear is a luxury I can no longer afford. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs and fueling the cold fire inside me. He thinks he knows all my secrets. He thinks he's been the warden of my whole story. But there's something I've never told anyone, not even you. I'm here, Anna. I'm listening. This was it. The secret I had carried like a smooth, heavy stone in my gut for over 40 years. A secret within a secret. My father. He left something for me. Something just for me. A second will. I could almost hear Dr. Reed's mind working, processing the implications. A second will? What do you mean? A codicil, I clarified, the legal term tasting like ash in my mouth. I closed my eyes, and the memory rose up, unbidden, and sharp as broken glass. It was years ago, not long before he died. He'd been drinking, his usual evening ritual of bourbon and self-pity. He wasn't a sloppy drunk. The alcohol only seemed to sharpen his cruelty, polishing it to a high gleam. He had found me in the library, staring out the window, and he'd come to stand beside me, the smell of whiskey and Old Spice enveloping me like a shroud. You look like her, you know, he'd slurred, his voice thick with a maudlin sentimentality that was more terrifying than his rage. Your mother, so beautiful, so breakable. He'd smiled then, a loose, wet smile that didn't reach his eyes. I did a bad thing to you, Anna, a terrible thing. My heart had seized in my chest. It was the closest he'd ever come to an admission. I'd said nothing, my silence a conditioned reflex. But a man must account for his follies, he continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. So I've made an arrangement, a little postscript to my legacy. He leaned closer, his breath hot on my cheek. I've written a codicil to my will, a little nest egg. For the product of my greatest folly, should they ever be found. The words had hung in the air between us, obscene and twisted. The product of my greatest folly. Not my son, not his grandson. A product. an it. A thing born of his folly. He was confessing, yes, but in a way that still centered himself, his grand, tragic flaw. It was a confession that was also an insult, a final act of psychological torture. It's a substantial sum, he'd mused, looking past me into his own reflection in the dark glass. Held in trust. But there's a catch, of course. There's always a catch. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. It contains a riddle, a clue to their identity, a clue that only you, my dear, broken girl, could possibly decipher. He told me the riddle then, his words a venomous whisper. It was a line from a poem he used to read to me when I was a child, before everything changed. A poem about a lost sailor searching for a hidden shore. It was our secret, a twisted perversion of a tender memory. It was a clue that pointed to a specific date, the date he had driven me away, and to a place, the so-called home for wayward girls. It was a map only I could read. I've hidden it, of course, he'd said, his good humor restored. Somewhere safe, somewhere you'd never dare to look. Consider it a final test, Anna. A challenge, to see if there's any of my strength left in you, or if you're just as weak as your mother. He had patted my cheek then, his touch condescending, proprietary. You'll be too broken and too scared to ever find it. You'll live out your days in this house, a ghost haunting my memory. That will be my true monument. He was wrong. I relayed all of this to Dr. Reed, my voice a low, steady monotone. I recited the riddle, the one I had repeated to myself in the dark for 40 years. When I finished, the line was silent again. Anna, Evelyn said, her voice filled with a stunned sort of awe. That is monstrously brilliant. It's a confession wrapped in a puzzle, hidden behind a threat. He was daring you. He was daring me to remain a victim, I corrected her. He built the lock, and he gave me the key, certain I would be too terrified to ever use it. He wanted to win, even from the grave. I looked around the kitchen, at the polished surfaces and the silent appliances. The will is in the basement. The basement that's been sealed for 60 years? The very one, I said, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time. He told me where he hid it, behind a loose brick in the fireplace down there. He thought sealing that door was the end of it. He thought the memory of what happened in that room would be a stronger lock than any nails or planks of wood. He underestimated you, Dr. Reed said softly. Everyone did, I replied. That was their mistake. And tonight, I'm going to correct it. That night, the house felt different. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was expectant. The air was charged, humming with the potential energy of a coming storm. I waited until the moon was high and the world outside was asleep. Then I went to the tool shed, the one my father had so meticulously organized, and I took the heaviest crowbar I could find. The door to the basement was at the end of the back hall, a plain, unassuming wooden door that was as infamous in my mind as the gate of hell. It was sealed shut with 2 thick planks of wood, nailed horizontally across the frame and into the wall. The nails were old, rusted into place. My father had put them there himself, the day after. Mark, a boy of 12, had watched him, his face a mask of solemn approval. 2 men, sealing away the family's shame. The crowbar was cold and heavy in my hands. It felt good, solid, real. I wedged the flattened end between the top plank and the doorframe. I put my entire weight into it. For a moment, nothing happened. The wood held, stubborn and unyielding. I grunted, pulling again, my muscles screaming in protest. Then, with a screech of tortured metal, the first nail began to pull free. Splinters flew. The sound was deafening in the silent house, a gunshot of defiance. One by one, I worked the nails loose. It was brutal, exhausting work. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging. My back ached. But with every groan of wood, with every shriek of metal, I felt a lifetime of paralysis breaking apart. This wasn't just wood and nails. I was prying open my own tomb. I was tearing down the monument to my silence. Finally, the last nail gave way with a loud crack, and the second plank fell to the floor with a heavy thud. The door was free. It stood there, unpainted and scarred, the brass knob tarnished with age. My hand trembled as I reached for it. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. I turned the knob. It resisted, then turned with a rusty groan. I pulled the door open. The air that hit me was a physical thing. It was thick, stale, a preserved atmosphere of misery. It smelled of damp earth, of coal dust, of decay, and of something else. Something metallic and vaguely sweet, the ghost of a scent I had spent my life trying to forget. It smelled like my childhood. I flicked on the flashlight I'd brought with me, its beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. The wooden stairs descended into blackness. I took the first step, then the next, the flashlight beam dancing over stone walls, slick with damp. The basement was exactly as I remembered it. A small, packed earth cellar with a cavernous stone fireplace on the far wall, a relic from when the house was first built. That's where he'd said it would be. My light swept across the floor, illuminating forgotten junk, rusted paint cans, a broken rocking horse, a stack of yellowed newspapers from 1958, ghosts of a life that had been abruptly frozen in time. I made my way to the fireplace, its mouth a gaping black hole. The air was colder here. I ran my hands over the rough, soot-stained bricks, searching. He'd said the third one from the left, on the second row up. My fingers found it. It was slightly loose, just as he'd promised. Using the edge of the crowbar, I carefully worked the brick free. It came away with a soft scraping sound, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity behind it. I shone the light inside, and there it was, a small tin box, the kind people used to keep biscuits in. It was rusted at the edges, but otherwise intact. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached in and pulled it out. It was lighter than I expected. I carried it back upstairs, not to the sterile kitchen, but to the living room, to my own armchair. I sat down, placing the box on my lap. This was it. The weapon he had forged for me, the inheritance he never thought I'd claim. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed cotton wool, was a folded sheaf of legal papers, tied with a faded red ribbon. The codicil, just as he described. I lifted it out, my fingers brushing against the brittle paper. But tucked beneath it, hidden from immediate view, was something else, an envelope. It was cream-colored like the one that had arrived this morning, but it was old. The edges softened with time, and the handwriting on the front was achingly familiar. It was my mother's elegant looping script. It simply said, "For Anna." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't part of my father's plan. This was an intrusion, a deviation from his script. My hands, which had been so steady, began to shake violently. I put the will aside and carefully picked up the letter. The envelope wasn't sealed. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The neat, controlled handwriting was a stark contrast to the chaotic turmoil of the words themselves. It was a deathbed confession. "My dearest Anna," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you have found your father's cruelest secret, and that I have been dead for many years. It means you were stronger than he ever believed, stronger than I ever was. I write this not to ask for your forgiveness, for I know I deserve none. I write this because the truth must be spoken, even if it is 60 years too late. I knew, Anna. I knew everything." The words seemed to lift off the page and hang in the air, shimmering with a terrible power. I knew. I knew what he was doing to you in this house. I heard the silence when there should have been laughter. I saw the shadow in your eyes that should have been light. I saw him look at you, and I chose to look away. I was a coward, Anna. My love for you was a small, timid thing, and my fear of him was a giant. It consumed everything. I chose my comfort over your safety. I chose my peace over your soul. It is the great, unforgivable sin of my life. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. They weren't tears of grief, but of a shattering, world-altering validation. I was not crazy. It was not a dream. She had known. When you told me that day in the garden, the letter continued, and I gave you that silver locket and told you not to say ugly things. Every word was a lie. I wanted to scream. I wanted to protect you. But I did nothing. And when he made you pregnant, my cowardice reached its peak. I let him tell me it was a nervous breakdown. I let him take you away. I let him give away my own grandchild. My hand flew to my mouth, a sob catching in my throat. The confirmation, the explicit, undeniable truth. But a life of cowardice leaves one with many sleepless nights. In those last years, after he was gone, I tried to find a sliver of courage. I could not face you, but I could leave you this. It is a pitiful offering, but it is all I have left to give. He didn't just give the baby away, Anna. There are records. He was so arrogant, so sure of his power, he used a legitimate agency. He thought money could bury anything. My eyes scanned the next lines, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The agency was called the St. Jude's Family Foundation. It was in the capital, and the family. He told me their name once, in a moment of drunken pride. A good, respectable family, he said. A doctor and his wife, unable to have children of their own. Their last name was Peterson. St. Jude's Family Foundation. Peterson. The names burned themselves into my memory. They were more than names. They were keys. They were coordinates on a map. They were facts. Hard, verifiable, undeniable facts. The letter ended with a final, desperate plea. I lived my life in a cage of fear. Don't let him win, Anna. Don't let his shadow dictate the end of your story. Use this. Use the truth. It is the only weapon that ever mattered. Forgive me if you can, but if you cannot, I understand. Your loving, cowardly mother, Helen. I folded the letter, my hands now perfectly still. I looked at the codicil, my father's cruel game, and I looked at my mother's confession. He had left me a puzzle. She had left me a sword. She hadn't just been complicit. In the end, at the very end, she had armed me. She had given me the truth. She had given me the weapon that would burn Mark's world to the ground. The meeting took place in a room that smelled of expensive leather and quiet superiority. Mark's lawyer's conference room on the top floor of a downtown building. It wasn't a court, not officially, but the atmosphere was thick with judgment. It was a trial. My trial. They sat on one side of a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the gray sky outside. Mark, looking every bit the concerned patriarch in his tailored suit. His wife, Amelia, her face a carefully arranged mask of sympathy and sorrow. And their 2 children, a daughter I barely knew, and their son, Leo. He was the only one who wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, his posture a study in discomfort. I sat alone on the other side. A single, old woman against a united, powerful family. The tableau was perfect. It was exactly the image they wanted to project. Mark's lawyer, a man with a smooth face and predatory eyes, began to speak. His voice was a low, reasonable drone, the kind of voice that could make an execution sound like a kindness. He spoke of my health and welfare. He used phrases like cognitive decline and in her own best interests. He recounted the incident with the wine and the portrait, framing it not as an act of protest, but as proof of my instability. And so, it is with the heaviest of hearts that my client, Mr. Mark Vance, feels compelled to step in, the lawyer concluded, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder, to provide the structure and care that his beloved sister so clearly needs and is no longer capable of providing for herself. He is petitioning for guardianship to protect her assets, to protect the family home, and to protect Anna from herself. I let the silence settle. I let them all look at me, waiting for my outburst, for my tears, for the erratic behavior they were so certain I would display. Mark's expression was a blend of pity and resolve. He was doing the right thing. He was the hero of this story. I let him have his moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached down to the worn leather bag at my feet. I brought out the small, rusted tin box and placed it on the polished table. The slight thud it made was the only sound in the room. All eyes went to the box. I did not look at the lawyer. I looked at Mark. I didn't say a word about the past 60 years. I didn't speak of basements or secrets or pain. Accusations could be denied. Hysteria could be dismissed. Instead, I opened the box. I slid the codicil, my father's second will, across the gleaming table toward him. Then, I placed my mother's letter right on top of it. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not the voice of a confused old woman. It was steady. It was clear. It was devoid of all emotion, except a cold, hard certainty. "Before you and the court declare me incompetent, Mark," I said, my gaze locked on his, "I have a small piece of family business I would like to attend to. I would like to formally execute this codicil to our father's will." Mark frowned, confused. He picked up the documents. His eyes scanned the first page of the will, his brow furrowing at the strange, sentimental language. Then he saw my mother's letter. He saw her handwriting. "What is this?" he murmured, picking it up. "I believe it's self-explanatory," I said calmly. "I want to use the money our father left in that trust to find the child he speaks of. I believe Mother's letter contains some information that might prove helpful in that search." I watched his face as he read. I watched it as a scientist watches a chemical reaction. It was a slow, devastating erosion. The confident set of his jaw slackened. The condescending pity in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then dawning disbelief, then pure, undiluted horror. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, gray pallor. His hand, holding the letter, began to shake. He was reading about the abuse. He was reading about the pregnancy. He was reading the name of the adoption agency. He was reading the last name, Peterson. He was reading our mother's confession that she knew everything, that his entire life, his entire perception of our family, of our sainted father, had been built on a foundation of lies and silence. The confident patriarch, the protector of the family legacy, crumbled before my eyes. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. In his eyes, I saw the edifice of his world collapsing into rubble. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Leo. He had been watching his father, not me. He saw the color drain from his father's face. He saw the hand begin to tremble. He saw the look of utter devastation, and in the boy's eyes, a new expression was dawning. Not just horror, but understanding. Disgust. The sacred image of his father, the strong, righteous head of the family, was shattering right in front of him. The room was utterly, completely silent. The lawyer stared, dumbfounded, at his client's sudden disintegration. Amelia was looking at her husband with a dawning sense of dread. I had not raised my voice. I had not wept. I had not accused. I had simply let the truth speak for itself. And its voice was the loudest thing in the room. The call came on a Tuesday. Not from Mark, of course, never from Mark. It was his lawyer, a man whose voice was as starched and bloodless as his shirts. He didn't offer condolences or apologies. The law has no language for such things. He simply stated, with the clipped efficiency of a telegram, that the petition for conservatorship had been withdrawn. Case closed. He hung up, and in the space where his voice had been, a new kind of silence began to bloom in the house. It wasn't the muffled, suffocating silence I had lived with for 60 years. This was a vast, echoing emptiness, a void created by the sudden absence of a war. The monster was gone, and now its jailer had fled, leaving me alone in the ruins. For 3 days, that silence was my only companion. I drifted through the rooms like a ghost in my own life, touching the furniture, tracing the patterns on the wallpaper. The house, which had always felt like a tomb, now felt like a museum dedicated to a forgotten tragedy. Every object held a memory. Every shadow seemed to whisper. The grandfather clock in the hall, the one my father would wind every Sunday with a grim satisfaction, had stopped ticking. I made no move to wind it. Its silence was a small, personal victory. I ate, when I remembered to, toast and tea that tasted of nothing. I slept in fits, waking up with my heart pounding, expecting to hear Mark's heavy tread on the stairs, his voice booming with accusations. But there was nothing, only the sound of my own breathing in the dark. The silence was a presence, a heavy blanket I couldn't throw off. It was the sound of a 60-year-old chain finally rusting through and falling to the floor. It was deafening. The phone rang on the 4th day. I flinched, my hand hovering over the receiver. I expected the lawyer again, or perhaps a town gossip who had caught wind of the story. But the voice on the other end was tentative, broken. It was Leo. "Aunt Anna?" he asked, and the name was a fragile thing in his mouth. "Leo," I said, my own voice raspy from disuse. There was a long pause, filled with the static of unspoken things. I could hear him take a shaky breath. I just wanted to call, to see if you were all right." "I'm all right," I said, and the words felt both true and entirely false. I was free, but freedom felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in a thick fog. "He told us," Leo said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Dad, he told us everything." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. Mark, the great protector of the family name, the iron-willed patriarch in training, finally broken. I imagined him in his pristine living room, the one with the leather armchairs, and the photos of his perfect family on the mantelpiece. I imagined his wife, Patricia, a woman who had always looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, her face crumbling as the architecture of her life was revealed to be built on a foundation of my suffering. I imagined Leo's sister, Chloe, who had my father's eyes, seeing the truth reflected in them for the first time. "It was ugly," Leo continued, his voice thick with a sorrow that was far older than he was. "We were all there. Chloe and I. We asked him why he was trying to put you away. He tried to use the same old lines, that you were fragile, confused, that the house was too much for you. But this time it didn't work. We had seen your face at the lawyer's office. We saw the truth in your eyes. We pushed him." He paused, and I could hear a faint sniffle. "He just shattered, Aunt Anna, like a plate falling on a stone floor. He started crying, not just crying, but sobbing. These horrible, guttural sounds. He told us about the baby. He told us about the abuse. He called him a monster. Our grandfather. He said he was just a boy, that he didn't know what to do. He said he was trying to protect the family. He kept saying it over and over again. I was protecting the family. But Chloe, she just looked at him and said, 'Whose family, Dad?' Because it wasn't Anna's." I sank into a chair by the window, the phone pressed hard against my ear. I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, just a profound, aching sadness for the boy Mark had been, the boy who had chosen the wrong person to protect. He had become his father's son in the worst possible way, not by committing his crimes, but by burying them. "Mom left," Leo said quietly. "She packed a bag and went to her sister's. She said she needed to think. She said she couldn't look at him. Chloe and I, we're still here in the house. But it's like a morgue. We just walk past each other. We don't know what to say. He built his entire life, our entire life, on your silence. And now that it's broken, there's nothing left." "I'm sorry, Leo," I whispered. "Don't be," he said, and for the first time, there was a spark of anger in his voice. "Don't you dare be sorry. This isn't your fault. It never was. I'm the one who's sorry. We should have listened. We should have seen." We talked for a little longer, our conversation circling the edges of the chasm that had opened up in our family. When we hung up, the silence in the house felt different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet, sorrowful clarity. The reckoning had come, not with a bang, but with the quiet implosion of a family's heart. The next morning I called a realtor. A cheerful young woman named Sarah arrived that afternoon, her binder full of market analyses and comparable sales. She walked through the house, complimenting the good bones and the charming period details. She saw hardwood floors. I saw the spot where my mother had dropped a teacup the day I returned from the home, her hand trembling so badly she couldn't hold it. Sarah saw a spacious master bedroom. I saw the room I was locked in for weeks, the key turning from the outside. She didn't see the ghosts. To her, it was just a house, an asset. And that, I realized, was exactly what I needed. For it to become just a house again. I sold it within a month, for less than it was worth. I didn't care. I accepted the first reasonable offer from a young couple with a baby on the way. They were excited about the big yard, about turning the dusty attic into a playroom. I hoped they would fill the halls with laughter so loud it would finally, permanently, chase the old whispers away. The day the movers came was overcast and cool. I stood on the porch and watched them work, systematically emptying my life into a large truck. Each piece of furniture that crossed the threshold felt like a word in a sentence I was slowly erasing. The heavy oak dining table, where my father presided over silent, tense meals, my mother's delicate vanity, its mirror clouded with age and secrets, my own narrow bed. They even took down the portrait of my father from the dining room. The movers, two young men who worked with an easy, physical grace, handled it like any other frame. They wrapped it in a moving blanket and slid it into the truck without a second glance. I felt nothing as it disappeared. He was no longer an icon to be feared or a monster to be hated. He was just a piece of painted canvas, a bit of unwanted clutter from a life I was leaving behind. When the truck was full and the house stood cavernously empty, the lead mover handed me a clipboard to sign. "That's everything, ma'am," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Thank you," I said. They drove away, and I was left standing in front of the hollow shell of my past. Before I locked the door for the last time, I took one final walk through the garden. My mother's roses were overgrown, their petals browning at the edges. The herbs I had tried to cultivate were choked with weeds. It was a garden of neglect, a perfect metaphor for the family that had planted it. Near the back fence, where the sun rarely reached, grew a single, stubborn thistle. It was tall and spiky, its purple flower a defiant fist raised against the decay. I had tried to pull it out a dozen times over the years, but its roots ran deep. I knelt in the damp earth, my old knees protesting. I gripped the base of the thistle with my bare hands, ignoring the sting of its thorns. I pulled. It didn't move. I set my jaw, leaned back, and put my entire weight into it, my knuckles white, my muscles screaming. I thought of my father's hand on my arm. I thought of my mother's averted eyes. I thought of Mark's angry, dismissive words. I pulled harder, a guttural sound escaping my own throat. With a final wrenching tear, the root gave way. I fell back, landing hard on the ground, the thistle held aloft in my hand like a trophy. Its root was long and gnarled, covered in thick, dark soil. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my clothes. I walked to the front of the house, to the porch, where the new family would soon stand. I laid the thistle down on the top step. A final act of weeding. A final, silent message that only I would understand. I locked the door, dropped the key in the mailbox, and walked away without looking back. The office of the private investigator was on the third floor of a nondescript building downtown, sandwiched between a tax accountant and a dentist. The air smelled of stale coffee and dust. The man behind the desk, a Mr. Davies, looked exactly as I had imagined. Rumpled suit, tired eyes, a face that had seen too much of the world's sordid underbelly. He didn't seem surprised by my story. He just listened, nodding occasionally, taking notes on a yellow legal pad in a cryptic shorthand. Telling him was a strange experience. I had replayed the events in my mind a million times, narrated them to my therapist in the safe confines of her office. But this was different. This was laying out the facts for a practical purpose. It was clinical. The subject's name was David Miller, I said, my voice steady. The event occurred in the spring of 1962. I was taken to the St. Jude's Home for Wayward Girls outside of Evansburg. A child was born. A boy. He was given up for adoption. Mr. And Davies looked up from his pad. "Do you have a date of birth?" I was told it was October 12th, 1962. He wrote it down. "And your name at the time?" "Anna Miller." He tapped his pen on the desk. "These are cold cases, Ms. Miller. Records get lost, sealed. St. Jude's closed down 20 years ago. It won't be easy." "I understand," I said, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. But in my mother's letter, she mentioned the name of the agency, the Evergreen Adoption Agency, and the family's surname. She only heard it once. Peterson. His eyes lit up with a flicker of professional interest. "That helps. That helps a lot." He quoted me a price that made me catch my breath, but I simply wrote the check. It was only money. My father had used it to cage me. I would use it to find my son. The next 3 weeks were a strange, suspended time. I lived in a small, furnished apartment that felt like a hotel lobby, a place of transit. I had no past there, and my future was a question mark hanging in the air. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. I would walk for hours through the unfamiliar city streets, watching people live their lives, wondering if any of them carried secrets as heavy as mine. I imagined my son. What did he look like? Did he have my eyes? Did he have his father's? My father's charm? The thought sent a chill through me. I prayed he was just himself. A man I didn't know. A stranger who was a part of me. I bought a book of maps and traced the outline of the country with my finger, wondering where he had landed. The call came on a Monday morning. "Ms. Miller? Davies here." His voice was all business, but I could hear something underneath it, a quiet satisfaction. I found him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I sat down heavily on the edge of the sofa. You did?" "Yes, ma'am. The Evergreen records were a mess, but your mother's note was the key." The surname was right, Peterson. They were a couple from Portland, Oregon, couldn't have children of their own. They adopted a baby boy born on October 12, 1962. They named him Samuel. Samuel. The name was a balm. It was a solid, gentle name, not the product of a secret, but a person. Samuel. "He's still in Oregon," Davies continued. "Lives in a small town on the coast. He's a carpenter, owns his own business building custom furniture. He's married, name's Clara. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, both in their 20s. A carpenter, a man who builds things with his hands, a family, a life. A whole, complete life that had been growing and branching out for 60 years, entirely unknown to me. A wave of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked the wind out of me, washed over me. A dizzying, soaring relief, a profound joy that he was well, and a grief so sharp it felt like a physical wound for the 60 years I had lost. I had missed his first steps, his first words, his first heartbreak, his wedding day. I was a stranger to my own son. "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice trembling. Is he happy?" There was a pause. "From the outside, Miss Miller, it looks like a good life. A quiet life. He's respected in his town. I spoke to a few people, casually. They say he's a good man. Solid. A good man." The 2 most beautiful words I had ever heard. Then came the question I had been dreading and longing for in equal measure. "So," Davies said, his voice softening slightly, "what's the next step?" He doesn't know he was adopted. The Petersons passed away years ago and apparently never told him. "Do you want me to arrange contact? A phone number? An address?" My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. The moment. For 60 years I had dreamed of this. Of finding him. Of seeing him. Of telling him. What? What did I have the right to tell him? What right did I have to detonate a bomb in the middle of his peaceful, well-built life? To arrive on his doorstep, a ghost from a past he never knew existed, and hand him my trauma, my pain, my story. I thought of my father. I thought of the way he had made choices for me, controlled me, decided the course of my life based on his own selfish needs. The abuse I endured wasn't just physical. It was the complete and utter theft of my agency. He had taken away my voice, my body, my child, my future. If I were to force myself into Samuel's life, demanding a place, demanding a relationship, wouldn't I be perpetuating that same cycle? Wouldn't I be another person making a monumental choice for him without his consent? No, I said, the word coming out with a surprising firmness. No contact. Davies was silent for a moment. Are you sure, Ms. Miller? I'm sure, I said, a strange calm settling over me. But I am going to write him a letter. And I need you to do one last thing for me. I need you to deliver it to him, in person, and I need you to tell him something from me. You must tell him that he owes me nothing. No phone call, no reply, not even a thought. The letter is not a request. It is just information, a piece of his story that belongs to him. The choice of what to do with it is his, and his alone. I spent the next 2 days writing that letter. I sat at the small desk in the anonymous apartment with a stack of clean white paper and a simple black pen. I wrote and rewrote, crumpled up sheet after sheet, the wastebasket overflowing with my failed attempts. How do you distill a lifetime of agony and love into a few pages? How do you explain the genesis of a life without it sounding like a curse? I started by telling him about the Petersons. I told him that from everything I knew, they were good people who had given him a loving home, and for that, I would be eternally grateful. I did not want to dishonor their memory. Then, I told him my story. I didn't use words like monster or victim. I simply laid out the facts as gently as I could. I wrote about a very young, very scared girl and a powerful man who took advantage of her. I wrote about the home, the secret birth, the crushing weight of a family's shame. I tell you this, I wrote on the final page, the ink slightly smeared from a tear I hadn't realized had fallen, not to bring you pain or to disrupt the life you have built. I tell you this because the truth of your origin is yours by right. It is a part of the tapestry of who you are. I have carried this story alone for 60 years. I am laying it down now, not at your feet as a burden, but in your hands as a gift. The gift of a truth that was kept from you. I think of you every day. I hope your life has been full of love and laughter. I hope you have been happy. That is my only wish. You owe me nothing. I am releasing this story into the world, and with it, I am releasing you from any obligation to me. Whatever you choose to do or not do, know that a stranger, hundreds of miles away, wishes you peace. Your mother, Anna. I sealed the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I met Mr. Davies for coffee and gave it to him. He took it, his gaze serious. I'll see that he gets it, he said. And I believed him. My new home is small. A cottage, really, nestled in a stand of birch trees by a lake hundreds of miles from Willow Creek. The air here smells of pine needles and damp earth. I chose it because it is the opposite of the house I left behind. The rooms are small and cozy. The windows are large and face the water, letting the light flood in all day long. There is no cavernous hall, no sealed-off basement, no ghosts in the shadows. The only sound at night is the gentle lapping of the water against the shore and the cry of a loon. The silence here is a different language. In my old house, silence was the sound of things being held back, of words unsaid, of screams swallowed. Here, it is the sound of peace, of presence. I have a garden. It is a small patch of earth, but it is mine. It is full of sunlight. I have planted lavender and chamomile, sun-loving flowers that don't need to fight for their existence. I spend my mornings with my hands in the dirt, tending to new life. There are no stubborn thistles here. In the afternoons, I read. I read all the books I was never allowed to, the ones my father deemed too sentimental or too challenging for a woman's mind. I read poetry and history and novels about faraway places. My life is quiet, measured not by anniversaries of grief, but by the turning of pages and the changing of seasons. A month after I moved in, a postcard arrived. I almost missed it, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a bill. I get very little mail. I don't know anyone here, and I left no forwarding address for the people I knew before. I turned it over. The picture was of a rocky coastline with powerful white-capped waves crashing against dark, jagged cliffs. It looked wild and beautiful. It looked like Oregon. My breath caught in my throat. My hands began to tremble. I slowly, carefully, turned the postcard over. There was no signature, no return address. On the back, written in a steady, clear hand, were just 2 words: "Thank you." That was all. I sank onto the small wooden bench on my porch, the postcard held in my hand. I stared at those 2 words until they blurred. Thank you. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a tearful confession of forgiveness or a promise of a future. It wasn't the ending you read about in storybooks, where long-lost family members fall into each other's arms. It was an acknowledgement. He had received my letter. He had received my truth. And he was grateful. He understood that it was not a demand, but a release. He had accepted this missing piece of his own story, and he was thanking me for it. In those 2 simple words, I felt the cycle of control and coercion, started by my father so long ago, finally break. My choice to give him his choice had been honored. I looked out at the lake, its surface shimmering in the afternoon sun. The water was calm, reflecting the endless blue of the sky. It was enough. It was more than enough. The long, silent war was over. I had not sought revenge against Mark, or justice against the ghost of my father. I had sought something far more fundamental. I had fought to reclaim the one thing they had stolen from me, the one thing that was truly mine, my story, my truth. And now, it was out in the world, not as a weapon, but as a quiet, steady light. My own. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a postcard, with 2 simple words. And sometimes, that is all you need to finally be free. What about you? Have you ever held a truth inside you that felt too heavy to carry? A story that needed to be told, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes, just speaking our truth is the first step to reclaiming our own peace.